Welcome to this week's Startup News. As usual, I'll go over some space stories I found on websites and social media posts. First of all, you can follow us on X. We're at Startup Hub. So let's get into the first story this week, and this is on Impulse Space. So let's just read this article. Impulse Space raises $500 million. And as usual, I'll just read the highlighted areas, and I'll put links to these articles in the video description so you can read them yourself if you want to. So the company has now raised a total of over $1 billion, and this allows the company to scale its effort to build in-space mobility infrastructure, the vehicles, propulsion systems, and operational architecture that determine where and how spacecraft move after launch. So this is part of the in-space economy. It's moving satellites around once they're already in orbit. So after they've been deployed by the upper stage of a rocket, they then need to be moved to their final orbit, maybe moved to geostationary orbit or translunar injection or wherever. So Impulse Space have flown 3 missions already. And the purpose of the company is to unlock a robust space economy and realize a true space age. A new layer of orbital infrastructure must be developed, spacecraft that are purpose-built for in-space mobility. So they're building space tugs or orbital transfer vehicles or kick stages, whatever term you want to use. So it goes on to say, the article goes on to say advanced in-space mobility. It's a required capability for the next phase of the space economy. And lower down, it talks about Mirror. This is their operational space tug. It has flown multiple times already. Their upcoming vehicle called Helios is a high-energy kick stage scheduled for first flight in 2027. And then at the bottom, it talks about Helios kick stage unlocks high-energy orbits. And down here, it mentions Lunar. So that is the article, and we have a brochure of the Helios space tug, a very powerful orbital transfer vehicle that should be operational in 2027. It was supposed to be earlier, but it's now looking like it will be 2027. And this provides access to low Earth orbit, to geostationary orbit, and potentially cislunar space with a translunar injection. And we do have video of the hardware. This is the size of the Helios space tug. As you can see, it's big, provides a lot of delta V. I think it's something like 4 to 6 kilometers per second delta V, which is very substantial. It can put a satellite from low Earth orbit to geostationary orbit within 24 hours. It's a very powerful kick stage. And I've mentioned before on this channel, in fact, I mentioned on my previous video, that they're working on a lunar lander. You can see the concept here. So the Helios space tug would perform a translunar injection, and then the lunar lander would be able to land on the moon with up to 3 tons of payload. I do have a slight concern though about the lunar lander, and that is, well, let's just have a look at their website. So this is the homepage of their website, and if we just search for moon, I'll just search for lunar, there's no mention anywhere. If we go to the Helios page, which is the kick stage that would be needed for lunar injection, we type moon, we type lunar. We do have one mention of lunar, but that's cislunar. That means between the moon and Earth. This is it. So there seems to be a clear de-emphasis of the lunar lander missions. I don't really see it in their marketing material or the X posts, and you can't find the link to the lunar lander from the homepage or from the Helios kickstage page, but it is still on the website. So we have a look at the website. So this is from October 2025. So it's over 6 months ago. It's highlighted because I've talked about it on this channel already. So it's still something that's happening, I believe, but it seems to be de-emphasized by Impulse Space. Perhaps it's not a priority, which I find strange because other companies such as Redwire are now much more focused on the moon because of NASA's emphasis on the moon base and on CLIPS and on CLIPS 2.0. So there's going to be many more opportunities to fly to the moon for lunar landers. As we'll hear about later on in this video, there are other companies that are now more focused on the moon. So it seems strange that Impulse Space, at least to me, seems to be de-emphasizing its lunar lander. But that's just my opinion based on looking at the website. Anyway, let's move on to the second story this week. Okay, our second story this week is on a story that's just broke the other day, and that is Voyager Technologies plans to buy Astrobotic. So let's just read the X post. So, breaking: Voyager to acquire Astrobotic, combining lunar landers, surface power, habitats, and cislunar operations into one integrated lunar platform. Griffin Mission 1, targeting the lunar South Pole not earlier than November 2026, will be Voyager's first mission to the moon. So that is the announcement. We have this video, so let's just play the video. So one ecosystem already in motion, and that is the Astrobotic lunar lander. So combining forces, and then you've got a rover, you've got the lunar lander. That is the video. We also have a post from the Astrobotic site, so let's just read that. So Astrobotic to join Voyager Technologies, accelerating America's moon base. So Astrobotic, pioneer in commercial lunar delivery, lunar power, reusable rocketry, today announced it has entered into agreement to be acquired by Voyager Technologies. This marks a major milestone in Astrobotic's nearly 2-decade mission to make the moon accessible and to build the infrastructure needed for a continuous US presence on the lunar surface. Astrobotic will become a core pillar of Voyager's strategic lunar initiative, providing the hardware, systems, and operational capabilities required to land on the moon, sustain life there, and perform critical work on the surface. And the CEO of Astrobotic, John Thornton, said, "Together with Voyager, we can accelerate the timeline for establishing America's moon base," unquote. Voyager intends to accelerate investment to scale Astrobotic's programs. With the acquisition, Voyager will become a lunar platform with capabilities that span the full arc of lunar operations. And then it lists some capabilities for communications, propulsion, surface delivery, surface power, long duration habitation. That's through Voyager's investment in max space, and dust mitigation and in situ resource utilization. That is using lunar resources to produce useful materials and gases such as oxygen and potentially silicon and so on. So Griffin Mission 1 continues on schedule, and that should launch at the end of this year. So that is the article from Astrobotic. Astrobotic are working on the Griffin lunar lander. They're also working on vertical solar array towers and a lunar power grid. So connecting all those solar array towers and other power systems from nuclear reactors to fuel cell systems all together into one high voltage DC microgrid. So that's something NASA's very interested in doing, and Astrobotic will be a key part of that. Voyager has also invested in Max Space, which are working on habitation modules. So this is all now under Voyager Technologies, which is the prime contractor for the Starlab commercial space station. So Voyager Technologies, along with Airbus, Mitsubishi, and MDA Space in Canada, plus Vivace in the US, Palantir, Hilton, are all working on the Starlab space station. And now Voyager clearly has ambitions for the lunar surface, along with Redwire, which again makes me wonder why Impulse Space seems to be de-emphasizing the moon. But anyway, let's move on to the next story. Okay, our next story is on NASA's core module is now dead. So we have this post from Eric Berger, put myself in the corner, and he said the NASA proposal to create a government-led core module to assist commercial space stations appears to be dead. Most of the commercial LEO destination vendors will celebrate this. Absolutely no one I know of liked this proposal. It was a terrible proposal. It was damaging to the commercial space station vendors. They'd received a lot of investment from companies based on them having a free-flying station. And then NASA pivoted and said, wait a minute, we don't want to have a free-flying station. Instead, we'll build this core module. You can see it here. We'll attach it to the International Space Station, and then vendors can attach their modules to this core module. So that's a terrible idea, right? No one liked it. But let's first understand why NASA came to that conclusion. So this is one of the slides from their presentation at the NASA Ignition event in March. You can see at the bottom it says, there is no independently verifiable market research indicating economic viability of a commercial station partially funded by NASA. ISS will end in 2032, and the replacement path must be economically viable and technically feasible, or America would give up its presence in LEO. I think there's a very high risk of America losing access to low Earth orbit because I don't see a commercially viable way forward. NASA has committed $250 million per year until the end of 2032. That's nowhere close to what's needed. It needs to be 10 times that amount. NASA is currently spending $3 to $4 billion per year to support the ISS. So even if commercial space stations are cheaper they're still probably in the range of $2 to $3 billion. So $250 million a year is nowhere close. And the private sector is not spending enough money on these missions to make them viable. We also have this slide. If we look at market budget reality column on the right, NASA says there's limited market growth and very limited recurring demand. Transportation costs are increasing, not decreasing. NASA positioned to be primary majority customer, insufficient budget for 2 destinations. In fact, they probably don't have enough budget for 1, never mind 2. NASA procures from a single provider with high execution risk in an uncertain market. They don't want a single provider and then NASA has to pay monopoly prices. So NASA doesn't have the funding, the private sector is not viable. So even though the core module is dead, it's still not clear how these commercial space stations are going to make any money. So we have a look at this graphic. I did this for Max Space, but it gives you an idea of the potential volume of some of these space stations. So Max Space potentially would be 350 cubic meters. Fast Space Haven 1 is 80, but I've seen figures from 45 to 80. Haven 2 is later. Axiom Station is 150 cubic meters to begin with. Starlab is about 450, although I've seen figures of 380. Then Blue Origin is 830, but I think we can dismiss Blue Origin for the time being. They don't have a launcher, they don't have a launch pad, and even if they did, the orbital station is the last of their priorities. So the situation is there are no future free-flying missions. Only 3 of them are flown, and 2 of them were paid for by Jared Isaacman. There's been 4 private astronaut missions to the ISS and 3 more planned. We'll just have to see. My opinion at the moment is that there is no commercial market for space stations for at least another 5 and probably 10 years. I think it's quite likely the US could lose access to low Earth orbit by the end of 2032. But I guess we'll just have to wait and see. On to our final story this week, and the article is titled Blue Origin has set a very aggressive return to flight timeline. So let's just read what it says. The chief executive of Blue Origin vowed Monday night that the company would launch again before the end of 2026. That gives them less than 6 months to return to flight, which seems unrealistic to me. We have a quote here from Dave Limp. He said, "Now that we have access to the pad and integration facility, we can share a bit of good news. The propellant farm, oxygen, liquid hydrogen, and liquid natural gas tanks are all in good shape. This is good luck because they have very long lead times. The water tower is also good," unquote. The company is going to press ahead with a rebuild of LC-36A site, which is designed for the 7x2 variant of the new Glenn rocket. That's the current variant. Blue Origin has plans for an even bigger variant called 9x4. That is 9 engines on the first stage and 4 engines on the second. Then we have another quote from Dave Limp. He said, "We had already been working for some time on eliminating our transporter erector in favor of an alternative vertical CONOP. CONOP is concept of operations. And we'll now go directly to that, so we don't need a new transporter erector. We will fly again before the end of this year." The company intends to rebuild the damaged launch site and return to flight as rapidly as possible. So Eric Berger says previously performed very well, which I'd push back on that. NG3 was not a success. The upper stage failed to provide sufficient thrust, and the customer satellite did not end up in a viable orbit and was lost. So it's only 2 successful flights out of 3, which is not great. Eric Berger goes on to say this is a risky move. A 6-month timeline to return to flight is very optimistic. The LC-36A site will need serious rework. Multiple sources have said that a more realistic timeline for Blue Origin to rebuild its pad and launch from there is 12 to 18 months. And this will significantly set back NASA and its Artemis program. New Glenn rocket and Blue Moon lander for both cargo and eventually crewed missions to the lunar surface. So Blue Origin is a critical vendor for NASA and the Artemis moon plans. It's providing both heavy cargo landers and crew landers to the moon. So it goes on to say speculation is focused on one of the first stage's main engines failing during a static fire test. And he goes on to say that's the least interesting part of the story. If there's any kind of flaw with the BE4 engine, that's a major issue. So I don't see why Eric Berger would say it's the least interesting part of the story. He says the BE4 engine has a fine track record. Again, I think he's being a bit too optimistic here. Blue Origin should be able to identify the cause of the failure and get the rocket flying safely again. Well, again, that's speculation. The reality is there's been 3 launches. The last launch, NG3, failed to put the satellite into a viable orbit for the customer, so the satellite was completely lost. The 4th booster and upper stage blew up before even getting to launch. So of the 4 booster and upper stage systems, so only 2 were successful. So I don't think the track record is great at the moment. In terms of NG3, it was a hydrogen fuel line that froze, which, as I said in my previous video, hydrogen is extremely difficult to work with and leaks through anything. So using hydrogen just makes your system less reliable. That was the cause of the problem with NG3. So we can see a previous flight there and a view of the engines. As I said in my previous video, I think in the long term, these sophisticated systems will work and will provide more mass to orbit and high performance, and that will be great. But NASA has an executive order from the President of the United States to get astronauts to the moon in 2028, and we're halfway through 2026 already. There's very little time to do that, and using very sophisticated, complex engines and very difficult to use propellants makes it very unlikely, I think, that the United States will beat China to the moon. China's approach, using simpler engines and using a simpler concept of operations, just 2 launches to get to the moon, is likely to succeed. I think they're going to beat NASA by quite a few years. That's my personal opinion. So there's like, what's best for commercial vendors in the long term? What's best for NASA in the near term? And the approaches need to be very different. So a more reliable engine system and a simpler concept of operations is what will get NASA to the moon quickly, which is what I said in my first video. So anyway, that's the space news this week. Thank you for watching. Please comment your thoughts and opinions down below, and I'll see you next time.